Hello, fellow artists, and welcome to Ted Does Art Demo 5. And in this one, it's Hulk, or actually Hulk, and then turning him into Gladiator Hulk. So recently, I've been, reflecting on my past work and realizing that I've lost some of the energy and joy that came from just strictly drawing. And it's kind of been a gradual realization, or something I've been thinking more about in the past couple months. And here's a pretty recent example of that in drawing the Hulk. And you're noticing I'm doing a lot of really rough thumbnails. And it's also, heeding some of the things I say to my students. One thing I say to them is no one cares how long it took you to get there. All they care about is the results. So if you had to do like 1 to 10 to 20 roughs to get to your final, then it's worth it. And I realized I need to start listening to my own advice. I think when I look at some of my work, even from a month ago, I still like it, I guess, and I do try to stay fluid with the drawing. But even though I have this mentality of working quickly, and even with the rendering, I think the idea of a polished piece, it was still kind of getting in the way. And so when I looked at some of my older sketches, the ones that I still like, I realized there was a certain kind of fluid movement and kinetic kind of energy that I wanted to get back to. And so that's what's happening here. And also to remind myself it's okay to be messy and have a lot of lines and make a lot of mistakes in order to get somewhere that I'm happy with and enjoy the process of drawing. So already you see I've done a number of roughs, thumbnails of the Hulk pose, and this one was maybe a little more than usual, but that's the nature of it. You never really can tell how the day goes. I remember at some point, I think just prior to this stage now, I was getting a little tired, and I was aware of that as well, and so that can affect your ability and your focus. Here I think I'm kind of now recharged a little bit. I didn't really take a break, but I was just kind of being relaxed, consciously trying to just relax. And I'm slowly kind of getting this pose together for the Hulk. And so part of this process, again, is related to a little bit of kind of feeling pulled in different directions with different hats as an artist. Because, there's the concept art side of it. Well, actually, let me backtrack. There's just technique-wise, like drawing versus painting versus simply sketching versus speed paints, photo bashing, all that sort of stuff. And, I learn all of that, and I do all of that to varying degree. And even though I'm aware that drawing was a thing that I always loved and continue to love, it did get slightly sidetracked by these other things, as well as teaching, and there's different objectives in teaching. Doing a design on my own is one thing. Doing a design demo for students is slightly different because the objective isn't actually to design. The objective is to teach students. And so I think all these little things in their subtle ways were kind of distracting me. And so now I'm a lot more aware and very conscious and intentional about just getting back to what works for me. And that's the same with every artist, I think, is doing the type of method or technique or medium that you feel comfortable and enjoy, and then also the subject matter and style. And I think that's coming on to a verging point for me, where those things are now coming together, reminding me of what it was that brought me here in the first place. Almost 20 years ago when I decided to go to art school, it was the love of drawing, the love of comic books and animation, and those kind of styles usually associated with it. And of course, taking some of the other things I've learned along the way, different design process, working in the digital medium, and techniques related to that, and then just converging that to a point that feels kind of as natural as possible. So, by this point with the Hulk here, who's one of my favorite comic book characters, yeah, it did take a little more takes than usual, but by the end of it, I was pretty pleased with it. Whereas when I look at some of my work even from a month ago, it may look deceptively polished, and even though I'm being aware to a certain extent about being loose with the pose and all that, it didn't have that same kind of energy that some of my other pieces had from time to time. Whereas with this one, I feel like by the end of it does, because I was willing to go through the process of multiple takes, but not necessarily being stressed by it, just being very loose and just remember this is part of the process to enjoy. And sometimes we forget and think if you can't do it in lesser takes, then it's not going to be enjoyable, and that's not a good way to look at it. And just have to kind of enjoy. So I think at this point I'm getting pretty close, and then I'm going to tighten up the lines. The face I'm struggling with, so I decide to do yet another take. And you get certain moments, so even though I'm in this kind of sketch mode, along the way I might get stuck again and start to kind of seize up a little bit, and then I gotta be conscious of it and go, whoa, gotta remind myself to stay loose again. And that was what was kind of happening with the head. And so I caught myself doing that. And then now when I'm at this point of the face, it's because I'm relaxing again and being aware of just enjoy the process of drawing. And it sounds like I'm really overthinking it, but it's just, this is all kind of slightly subconscious and just kind of going in my head as I'm doing it. But I think it's more like even when I'm not drawing, that's when I'm reminding myself that the next time I draw to stay loose and enjoy the process and bring back some of that fluid energy and posing and line work that I've had in the past. And so the nice thing, of course, is utilizing Photoshop or Clip Studio in this case with tools like scaling and distort. And that's helpful as long as it doesn't get in the way. And you'll notice that there was at one point that I resized him a little bit, and I made him a little more exaggerated, even more so on the torso, by using the distort tool. Yet I still, after doing that, I still went over and drew on top of it, because the freehand line is always going to be more consistent, and you can fix things that the distort tool isn't quite capture. The nice thing about Clip Studio Paint is you can just easily convert the line color without any kind of strange resolution changes, and so I just turn that clean red line to black. And what I've also been doing is, in conjunction with being reminded about a drawing focus, is I've been experimenting with just going straight into color, whereas in the past I predominantly went grayscale. And so again, this mentality of being loose and kind of enjoying it, being a little more organic with how I work. And I laid down a base paint of blue just to give it that extra tint, and again, not worried about making it completely solid or opaque. This adds another kind of subtle layer of color change and quality to it. And at this point, now that I've had the line, it's even easier now, because I'm just going in and just filling in the colors. And at this point, I was very quick coloring it and painting. And so it's been very kind of eye-awakening, or it's been eye-opening and an awakening for me a little bit personally, given that I feel like, all artists feel at some point you need to kind of push yourself, or at least you get too comfortable or stale. And I think it's all kind of happening at once right now, not just with the drawing, but also the way I'm coloring it. Even my openness to do some fan art, not for the purpose of, I've mentioned in another post that it can be, you have to be careful, because in doing fan art, the idea of pandering to an audience might be the more of a priority, even though you still enjoy the characters. And so I make sure whenever I do fan art that I'm actually in the mood for it, as opposed to some other ulterior motive like, I need some more likes or more exposure. I think, again, that sort of stuff comes very naturally if you're just doing what you love, rather than worrying about how many legs you have or visibility. So you'll notice with my work, even though I'm doing more fan art, it's still in the minority compared to my own original designs, because that's what I enjoy doing more so. But it's good to take breaks. So I filled in the background. One thing we saw me earlier was that you, after doing all the general values, is bring up more of a focus where the lower body is a little bit darker and a little more desaturated, and the upper body, especially towards the head, is a little bit brighter and more contrast. So there was the Hulk, and now I am turning him into Gladiator Hulk, or Planet Hulk. And what you don't see here is on another monitor, I'm referencing the armor design from Thor Ragnarok. It's really cool. I like how they went about it, yet still pretty faithful to the original comic in Planet Hulk. And this is kind of the video game development background coming back in, where we do kind of modular mindset. And usually you hear that in relation to 3D modeling, but that also is the case in 2D and in concept. Another way of looking at it is just essentially doing a paper doll. So, you wouldn't do this if all I was gonna do was the Gladiator version, then it would seem kind of pointless to go to so much length in painting the previous one. But I knew ahead of time that I wanted to do two versions, and so this allows me to have this fun kind of before and after, because it's in the exact same pose, but allows me to have two art pieces and done in a timely manner. So kill two birds with one stone. And so I'm just, sketching in the armor. Now I'm working on the hammer. And here's this example where I'm utilizing the distort and selection tool, which is helpful. But rather than leaving it that way, still going over with freehand drawing to make it more seamless and to subtly correct and fix certain things that the distort tool doesn't quite get. And as I've mentioned before, these kind of things are they're handy to save time, but they're not an excuse to not do it properly. I tell my students that it is a shortcut, but you have to earn them. It's not out of laziness or because of lack of knowledge. A common one is I'll see students use the distort tool as an escape from understanding a learning perspective. But the problem is, if you don't understand perspective and you can't do it in your drawing, then the distort tool won't help. It's going to clearly show still that you don't understand perspective. So really, when you see someone, or when I'm using it, I'm envisioning the perspective in my head. But if it still doesn't look right, then I'll draw it out, even do perspective lines. So now I have a sketch of the armor and the hammer. And I put a base like this chocolate brown color, and I'm using taking advantage of the previous Hulk I did there, and just color coded the green over the blue jeans, and I'm adding the sandals, and slowly kind of building up the different aspects of the sections of the armor, material, and the color. And again, at this point, it's pretty easy breezy, just going in and filling in all the little fleshing out all the little aspects of color and detail and highlights and shadows. At one point, I'm realizing that when by doing this with having the body underneath it makes it a lot easier to place the armor with proper shape and perspective, and then it's falling on the body correctly. But even doing so, I realized that his forward leg looks a little long. It didn't before. Why is that? It's because the way I've placed the torso armor is a little bit too much to the left. So the illusion is it's making his leg look a little too long, even though in the previous version without the armor it looked fine. So sometimes it will happen, right? You'll find something and correct it right away, but in this case I correct it a little later, and so here you see me correcting it. The nice thing about Clip Studio Paint is you can select multiple layers and move each piece. In Photoshop, at least last time I checked, you're not able to do that. You'd have to merge it down and then you can select that one layer. But in this case, the lines and the color were two different layers, and it allowed me to still select a specific area and move it, and that's what I did there. and then I quickly filled in the gaps to adjust it. So now all of a sudden the leg doesn't look long anymore. So those are sort of things that keeping track of when you're judging your work. If I had made the leg shorter, that might have worked, but it probably wouldn't, because we saw before the armor that it looked fine. So in this case, no, it wasn't the leg that was too long. It was because of the position of the torso armor was shifted over too much. So that's that kind of comparison that we need to make whenever we're doing our drawings. So here I'm doing the same thing that I did in the previous version, where I'm doing some value tweaks. The lower torso is now a little bit darker, and I'll desaturate the colors a bit more on the bottom, so it draws attention to the head. And then I'll around the head area, I'll pop the contrast and saturation slightly more, a little bit more, and then again that leads the eye towards Hulk's helmet. And again, because eye is a window to the soul. And so here we're winding down, just doing for more tweaks, reusing the same background, but at least maybe adjusting some of the lighting and the color. Because Planet Hulk, or even Thor Ragnarok, takes place on the planet Sakaar, so putting a bit of that Sakaran blue sky and a nice little orange tint so you can feel the heat. And there you go. There is Gladiator Hulk. So I hope you enjoyed that little demo. I certainly enjoyed drawing it. And until next time, take care.